for your love for us. And pray that you would encourage us and strengthen us in the service and the message, in our worship, in our giving, so that we can honor you in these ways. And Lord, I pray that you would just work in our hearts this morning as we look to your word to encourage us in living our faith. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm starting a new series. I finished my series on the life of Paul up last year, and then we got into the Christmas season, so I did my Christmas series, and then I had the stewardship series, and that lasted for 4 weeks, and it's over with. And so, I was wrestling, trying to find somebody. I wanted to preach from somebody's life, because I like life experiences and life stories, and preaching and hearing people preach. So I was looking for somebody whose life wasn't perfect. You know what I'm saying? I mean, well, in the Bible, some people's lives are presented as really, really good, and they're, like Abraham, he had a few downfalls, but for the most part, he didn't do anything wrong. So I was looking and looking, and then finally I came across Moses. Moses is a guy who had a lot of ups and downs in his life, and he's a guy I can relate with. Can you relate with that, having a lot of ups and downs in your life? I mean, life is not peaches and cream. It's not easy. It's hard. And Moses, of many of the people in the Bible that I looked at, his is the life that was really dealt with a lot of challenges and a lot of issues and frustrations and disappointments. Boy, I'm really bumming myself out up here. But his life is real, and I wanted to look at somebody's life as real that we can learn lessons from, that we could apply to our own lives that can help us to learn how to live a Christian life in difficult times. And so this morning we're going to start in Exodus chapter 2, verse 1. So again, this is not preaching through a book. I'm preaching through a life, like I did with Paul. We skipped sections in the Acts. And that's what we're going to do here in the life of Moses. So in Acts, I shouldn't have said Acts, because now I'm going to say the rest of the message. Exodus chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "And a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son." Now, when I'm doing stories like this, I don't like calling them man and woman. It doesn't work for me. So in Numbers chapter 26, and I don't have to give them names either, because their names are in the Bible. Numbers chapter 26, verse 59, says, "The name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, who was born to Levi in Egypt. And to Amram she bore Aaron, Moses, and their sister Miriam." So guess who this is? This is Moses' mom and dad, Amram and Jochebed. Now, I want to give a little bit of history here of the setting of what's going on. They're in Egypt, okay? And if you go back into the book of Genesis, you'll remember the story of Joseph, the coat of many colors, the 12 sons of Israel, and how Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers and ended up down in Egypt, and he had a lot of hard times and a lot of struggles in his life, and eventually got to the place where he was in charge of all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. And there was this great famine in the land, and it was not just in Egypt, it was all over the Middle East. And so Joseph's brothers came down, and they wanted to get some grain so they could take it back to their father and their family and survive. And you know the story, back and forth and struggle, and Joseph's got some, I think he's got some vengeful things going on there. Justified, absolutely justified. And then his heart breaks, and he realizes, I'm doing the wrong thing, and he welcomes his brothers and loves them. And then he brings his whole family down to Egypt. So his family is living down in Egypt, and they moved to this place called Goshen. And Garrett's got an awesome picture of Goshen. This is the area. So this is, I should have had my pointer up here. I do have my pointer up here. Look at that. Unfortunately, it's been on for the last 6 months. It doesn't work. So that area there is the Nile Delta. So that river coming up from the south on the left side there is the Nile, and it comes up and all of the soil and soot and everything that's carried down by the river deposits in the delta there at the end. And so that area there is the land of Goshen, and that's where Joseph settled his family when they came, in the choicest land of Egypt, which is the land of Goshen. And then we have a real picture now of this beautiful delta area. I mean, you wouldn't think that was Egypt, would you? It's beautiful. It's like a forest, and that's the area that Joseph and his family moved into, and they live there. So we pick up in Exodus chapter 1 verse 7. It says, "But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them." So they multiplied like rabbits. They were just having babies, and families were nine kids, and everybody was surviving, and so they just kept multiplying and multiplying until it wasn't long until maybe a couple of 100 years, but they filled the land. And so in verse 8 of Exodus 1, it says, "There arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land.'" Now, I want to tell you that Bible interpretation is important, and a lot of times you have to read commentaries and things when you can't understand what you're reading. And one of the things that frustrates me is when liberal commentators, try to minimize the significance of the numbers in the Bible. So it says at the end of Exodus, when the children of Israel leave Egypt, that there are millions of them. And so the liberal commentators minimize that so that it was just a few thousand. It was just a few thousand. And Jericho, the city of Jericho, the walls weren't really that big. There weren't that many Jews. There was a few thousand people in that city, and it was probably just a wooden barricade surrounding it. But if you look into the rest of the story, what does the king of Pharaoh say about how many Jews there are? There are more of them than there are of us. And this was at the beginning of this process in verse 8. So there were a lot of Jews at this point in the story, more Jews than there were Egyptians. So is that a few thousand Jews? That's a lot more than a few thousand Jews. So in verse 11, "Therefore they set taskmasters over the Jews to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses." The Jews built those cities, not just a few thousand people. "But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied." They multiplied more, even more like rabbits. And they were just growing and growing as a nation. And they were in dread of the Egyptians were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, basically making them slaves. They were welcome guests to begin with, but at this point they're just made into slaves. "And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and brick and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Then the king of Egypt spoke to it didn't work. It didn't keep them from growing and multiplying. So the king of Egypt calls the midwives and he says, "Okay, here's what I want you to do. Every boy child that is born, I want you to kill him." And the midwives feared the Lord, so they didn't do that. And so when they got called in, to be scolded by Pharaoh, they said, "Well, the Jewish women are hardier. They have the babies before we get there. They're not like you wimpy Egyptian women. You're wimpy Egyptian women who labor and labor and labor. The Hebrew women are really vigorous in the way that they have their babies." And of course they were lying. They didn't want to kill the babies, and so they feared God, so they didn't kill the babies. And so that didn't work, and they kept multiplying and multiplying. So finally, Pharaoh gives this edict throughout all of Egypt in verse 22. "So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, 'Every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive.'" That was his final solution for the Jewish problem. Let's go back up into verse 1 there. It says, a man of the house of Levi, Exodus 2:1, and a man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi, so the woman conceived and bore a son. Knowing that she conceived knowing that this child had a 50-50 chance of having to be thrown into the Nile River. That would be a tough choice, wouldn't it? But what I want us to see is that Amram and Jochebed lived life in spite of the chaotic world in which they lived. You see, you and I, when things are bad, kind of want to circle the wagons. We want to make defensive positions to protect ourselves. And we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we might have to suffer any kind of negative consequence. But sometimes we can go too far in how far we circle those wagons and stop living life because we're afraid of what might happen. You know, there's all this political stuff going on with Donald Trump and all of the chaos that's arisen because of the things that he's doing. He's doing what he promised to do, but that doesn't mean that it's not making people angry. But it's our world is up in chaos, and it just seems to be getting worse. So we could have that tendency to want to circle those wagons. Like, if we were back here in Egypt as a Jew, I think maybe we would have thought about not having any babies. It would have been a serious conversation in our home. But they did it anyway because they chose to live life in spite of the chaos of the world around them. So in verse 2b, we pick up and it says, and Jochebed saw that he was a beautiful child, and she hid him 3 months. So she had the baby, and she hid him for 3 months. And, I imagine that was pretty rough, I can't imagine that they were living in palatial quarters. They were probably all crammed together in ghettos and slums. And guards walking through all the time, trying to keep everything in order, and keeping a baby from crying. Moms.
Yeah, you're right.
Not the easiest thing to do, right? But she worked for 3 months, keeping this child quiet, keeping him safe, all while protecting him. Because she resisted the pressure to conform to the standards of the world she was living in. She resisted that pressure. The world is putting pressure on us as Christians. We need to conform. We need to do things the way they want us to. We need to believe what they think we should believe. And so there's this kind of pressure. And it was the same thing back then. She was under that constant pressure to believe and do what she was supposed to because of what the world said. But she resisted that. She resisted that pressure and kept that baby and kept him safe for 3 months. But eventually, in Exodus 2, 3, and 4, we come to the place where she can't hide him anymore. What's a little baby? Okay, not a lot of problem, but how are you going to keep your kid from laughing, right, when he's 3 months old, or she's 3 months old? It gets to the point where we just can't control the child anymore. So she took an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with asphalt and pitch. So an ark of bulrushes is basically, bulrushes are reeds, and she built this little boat, tied on the ends, and made it a kind of a hollowed out center, like a boat, and covered the outside with pitch and asphalt, making it waterproof. And she built a cover and made it. It was like a basket, and she put it into she put the child into it and then laid it in the reeds by the riverbank. I missed the picture, Garrett. We're going to go to number 3, okay? So she put it in the reeds by the riverbank, and so this is the Nile River, And who knows, this could have been where she put Moses. It's just a shallow place as the river is meandering its way down to the Mediterranean. And she came up to the shore and she put him in the river. She did what other choice did she have? I mean, it was either that or probably a soldier would come and throw him into the river. And I picture this, that the command wasn't to put the little babies in boats. And, there are movies where, there's an old movie where Moses is in a boat and this other little baby is in a boat and Moses kicks the other boat and he gets made into the Prince of Egypt and this other baby goes off and becomes a slave somewhere. I don't think it was like that. I think this was something she did in her heart because what the command was to throw the babies into the river. And what was waiting for them, Garrett?
Yeah.
The next picture? The scary one?
Crocodile.
Right, this is the Nile River, okay? And that's what lives in the Nile River. And you get the picture. It was not a safe place, and so to throw a baby into the river was just a death sentence. If the baby didn't drown, they would be eaten by crocodiles or alligators or whatever that is. Does anybody know what they have? What it's called in Egypt? What's it called? Crocodile. Right? So she knew what was out there, and so she did the best that she could to protect her baby. I mean, she followed the law. She had to do this. There was no way she could save her baby, so she did what she could to put the baby in the best situation she could to protect it. When Jochebed could no longer stand against the wickedness of the world she lived in, she acted in a way that was consistent with her faith and conscience. She could not throw a baby into the river. So in Exodus chapter 2, verse 5, it says, then the daughter pardon me, I didn't read it. In verse 4 it says, and his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to the baby. So obviously Miriam is over. And she watched from the distance to see what would happen. So in Exodus 2:5 it says, then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. Right? I mean, what happens, Mom, when your baby's crying? It's that, oh, we all say, oh, right? Till they don't stop, and then it's not off.
Now you go from awe to here.
But it says she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. And then his sister said to the Pharaoh's daughter, I love this part of the story, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew woman, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter says, go. So she went home and got her mother, the baby's mother, and brought her to Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter said, take this child away and nurse him for me. And ladies, this is the best part of the story. And I will give you wages to raise him.
Sweet.
That's the way life ought to be.
Amen.
Right there. But as we look at all of it, she does what she can. She puts him in this little boat and makes it waterproof and puts it in the reeds so that it can't float down the Nile and go out into the Mediterranean Ocean or be, eagle bait or crocodile bait. She does all that she can, and then God orchestrates this event where they come just at this time to bathe in the river, and sees it and opens it up, and the baby cries just at the right moment, in the right way, touches her heart. God gives her a sense of compassion. She takes this baby and she decides to raise this baby for her own. So God orchestrated everything involved, the people, the events, all leading up to Jochebed's son being delivered by Pharaoh's daughter. Pretty cool, right? So now we come to the end of the story in Exodus chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. It says, so the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. She called his name Moses. Pharaoh's daughter called his name Moses. Now, names. Names are important, in the Old Testament especially, because the name tells you something about the person or something that is true about them at their birth. So Esau. Red hair, right? Jacob. Deceiver. How do they know it? But the name tells you something about the person. Moses means drawn out of the water. Drawn out of the water. Now, our names are important, right? I think they're more important than we realize. There's something in the Bible called the Book of Life. Have you ever heard of that, the Book of Life? It's at the end of time when God's judging the great white throne judgment. It says that in Revelation, so I'm going to mess Jared up, I'm going to change the order of what I'm going to do here. That anyone whose name was not written in the Book of Life was cast into the lake of fire. Okay, so the Book of Life is important. And your name is how does this work? How does a person's name get in the Book of Life? Well, let's look at Exodus chapter 32, verse 30. This is kind of a theology lesson. This is just my view of how this all works. Exodus 32:31. Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Oh, these people." Now, this is Moses coming down. This is later on in his life. We're going to skip ahead 40 years or whatever. And so Moses comes down from the mountain with the tablets in his arm. Charlton Heston. The picture coming down the mountain. His hair's all glowing. He's all gray. And he comes down and he sees, and they're frolicking in the plain there, and they've made this idol. And so what does he? He throws down the stones and breaks them, and he's all mad. But this is what he prays after that in Exodus 32:31 through 33. He says, "Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, 'Oh, these people have committed a great sin, and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book which you have written.'" Wow. He probably had second thoughts about that later on in this journey, as they're 40 years later wandering in the wilderness, and they're still complaining and whining and doing all these sinful things. But in the beginning he says, "But not, I pray, blot me out of your book with which you have written." So he was willing to give up his eternal salvation in order to ask God to forgive them for this sin. That's what he's saying here. And so the Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book." Revelations 3:5 says, "He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels." So this is how I see it. I see it that God has a book of life, and everyone who is ever born or conceived, their name is written in the book of life. And it isn't until we die without Christ that our name is blotted from that book. If you die without Christ, without trusting Christ for your forgiveness, then your name is wiped out, blotted out. And so, what was that?
Whiteout.
I don't picture this as a whiteout kind of thing. I see a big quill pen and a big black ink well and a black, blotted out. That's how I see it. So everybody's name has been written in this book of life, I believe, from eternity past. Everybody who is ever conceived, his name was written in this book from eternity past. That's how I see it. Maybe it makes me feel better about myself, having the name Tracy. I don't know. But, right? I mean, that's the name God planned for me to have from the very beginning. And in the same way, Moses is the name God had planned for Moses to have from the very beginning, from eternity past. And so God had orchestrated that the whole event, everything leading up to Moses getting his name, God orchestrated that. Now this is really tricky because of understanding the will of God, the sovereignty of God. Now God is sovereign, I believe that. But I think sometimes we take God's sovereignty too far in making him responsible for the evil things that had happened. So you could say that God's sovereignty is what caused Pharaoh to make the command to throw the babies into the Nile. You could say that, but you'd be dead wrong. God's sovereignty works with his will, his desired will, and our free will to weave that all together to get what he wants to happen without violating our free will. Now, there are times when God moves in ways that go beyond that, but generally speaking, this is again how I see it, generally speaking, God works not causing the evil, but allowing the evil because that's the way it works, but using that evil for his purposes. Does that make sense to you? I mean, it's not an easy thing. And bad things happen to people. And I don't want to minimize how significant that people view this idea and this concept. But what I'm trying to say is that God used this. God used an Egyptian princess to give Moses the name he had given him before the world began. And that amazes me. So what can we learn from these things? First, as we face uncertain times, and we are in uncertain times, you should live life in spite of the chaotic world you're living in. We have to keep going. We have to keep living as Christians. We can't give up on living out our lives as though we're going to be alive tomorrow. We have to live as though we're going to be alive tomorrow. But at the same time, we need to resist the pressure to conform to the standards of the world. We need to resist as much as we can, as long as we can, as hard as we can. But there comes a point when you can no longer resist. And when that happens, we need to act in a way that is consistent with our faith and conscience. That's it. I mean, we have to act in a way in this situation, Moses was dead. He was dead. If she had kept him, he would be dead. So she did what she could according to her faith and conscience. You know, we were talking we had the first Walking in Love study on Thursday night. I'm surprised all you people came back to church. It's a huge, isn't it? A huge responsibility that we have to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. And it could be overwhelming. It could be paralyzing. But ultimately, we had a lot of questions about how do you do this, and what about that, and what about this, and really it comes down to us trying to live out our faith with our conscience and just doing the best job we can. We can't be perfect, but we can try to live out in sincerity our faith in good conscience, and that's what God wants us to do. Next, we need to trust in God to orchestrate the people and events leading up to our deliverance, whether in this life or the next. God's going to deliver us from whatever it is we face, tribulation, troubles. He's going to deliver us. Maybe in this life, definitely in the next life. Not everybody lives. And that's the way it is. But everybody who's trusted in Christ and has their name written in the book of life lives forever. And that's what we're looking forward to. And then the last thing, remember, God knows your name. And it is written in the book of life. And it's been there from all eternity past. If you've trusted Christ for your forgiveness. And there's nothing that can change that. Because the only way you can have your name blotted out of the book of life is if you die without Christ. But if you have Christ, then you have nothing to fear. Isn't that awesome? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you love us. As we've seen you love Moses, you love us. You care about us, Lord, in the face of these difficult, challenging days that we live in, Lord. You know our needs. You know our conflicts. You know the challenges. but you are in control, and we can trust in the fact that you are going to work out those details, Lord, that if we are faithful to you, if we're obedient to you, resisting that as much as we can, and then when we can resist no longer, that we live out our faith and conscience in a way that we can work out the best that we can, Lord. We can trust in your deliverance. We can trust that whether you deliver us in this life or the next, that we can have confidence that we're going to be with you and you're going to protect us, our souls. You say, don't fear those who can kill the body. Fear the one who can kill the body and the soul. And so we fear you and we trust in you, that you are going to protect us, Lord. And we thank you, Lord, that you know our names, that you wrote our names in the book of life from eternity past, and that you have given us the opportunity to trust Christ for our forgiveness, and that we have that forgiveness, and because of that, our names will never be blotted out of the book of life. Lord, we thank you for your love for us. And as Moses' life had a rocky start, Lord, we can have confidence that regardless of how our day starts, whether it's a rocky start or a calm one, you're going to bring us through the end. And we thank you, Lord, for your love for us. We praise in Jesus' name.